Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Death of Death podcast, where we proclaim Christ's victory over sin, death, and everything else. I'm your host, as always, Nick Stewart. Actually, it's Detective Stewart to you. We keep getting things stolen off of our patio in our apartment complex, so I spent the morning canvassing the entire complex, looking at everyone's balconies for our chairs. Tried to get some statements from some witnesses, but no one's returning my calls. So I just figured, here's the thing with witnesses. I've learned from watching so much true crime over the years that you don't know what you know. You saw someone in the apartment complex carrying a patio chair 2 days ago. Why would you think that's relevant unless someone really angry comes up to you and starts asking you questions about it, right? So I'm trying to get as much info from those days as I can, and something must pop up eventually. Someone knows something. Someone saw something. Isn't that exciting to know there's a mystery that you're going to crack and maybe bring down an elite crew of thieves in the Oklahoma City area? I'll keep you updated on my progress as this case unfolds. I know that you're all super interested and on the edge of your seat to know what happens. I want to revisit something that we've talked about on the show before, which is the false religion of statism. And the last time we talked about it, it feels like we talked about it super recently, but that was before the election even happened. So as you can imagine, a lot has taken place. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I don't talk about politics a whole lot on this show, so I just figured we could do one episode to talk about a few of the big events since, October, I guess, was our last episode on this. One thing I want to point out in the beginning is the fact that the religion of statism is really made up of a lot of different, smaller sects. Environmentalism is kind of its own religion with its own kind of worldview, but it's all kind of within the greater religion of statism. Democracy is kind of its own thing. The Constitution has its own religious following. COVID has definitely become its own sect, cult thing in a lot of ways, and I'm going to talk about that more toward the end of the show. So since we last talked about this, we've seen some of these smaller ones grow in intensity, and obviously that means that the entire thing is kind of growing in intensity. I listen to old punk rock and old classic hip hop, and I just miss the days when cool people hated the government, when did that go away? When was it suddenly cool to vote for someone who's been in the government for 50 plus years? I just don't know what happened. So it's kind of like how a lot of people view Christianity. We on the inside of Christianity as believers see it a little differently. We see our differences with the Catholics, for instance, as pretty huge issues, and that's true. But from the outside, people view us as basically the same, with a few small differences. But, ultimately the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the Bible, these are the most fundamental to our faith, and those things are true to Catholics and Protestants alike. So there is kind of this thing that unites us, even though on some very important issues, perhaps even salvific ones, we have disagreements. So we see the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as maybe two different denominations of Methodism. For those of us outside of Methodism, we probably don't really care about the difference between two denominations. But for them, it's big enough to separate over and consider themselves, different entities. And I think 2 or 3 things have happened since the last time we spoke about this. And I want to try to cover all the main ones today. But, it's just important for us to realize, the Republicans and the Democrats, have their differences, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not totally different things. They are pretty much just smaller parts of this huge religion of statism. So first thing we need to talk about is this blatant, blind worship of democracy, as if it was this transcendent righteous thing. I recall mentioning this before the election, so it's not as if, democracy worship wasn't a thing before, but it has definitely risen to new heights, as these things often do. They all kind of just keep growing in intensity until something breaks. I just don't know what the nature of that is going to be. But one side is questioning the legitimacy of the last election. One side is saying nothing to see here. But both of these positions are largely based in the same faith. It's this overvaluing of democracy. And, I know this might be slightly out of vogue now that Biden is president and no one's really talking about whether the election was true or not. But believe me, that everyone on one side of this still believes that was a huge miscarriage of justice. So it is something worth talking about. So Trump and his followers are largely believe the last election to be rigged, and now I haven't seen any objective evidence that was the case. So I definitely wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that outright, but there was definitely some funny business going on. I think that's a nice way of saying it. But who knows what the nature of it actually was, I think the strongest piece of evidence in favor of it being rigged was that people signed sworn affidavits and testified in court that they were used to pull this thing off. I recall a truck driver claiming that he was used to move massive amounts of ballots in the late hours of election night. But here's the problem. I don't know that any election in our country's history has ever been, quote unquote, legitimate. I've never sat down and counted every ballot for myself to see that that's the case. We are all just trusting someone from the government to tell us that everything was counted correctly and that everything is above board. And, I don't know if you know this, but doing things above board and doing things well are not exactly things that the government's known for. So that should be suspicious at best. For all I know, no president in my lifetime was elected legitimately. And I mean, legitimate in the framework of our elections. I don't mean objectively legitimate, because no president is objectively legitimate. On the other hand, I also have, no idea if this person is telling the truth. I mean, I can't work out their motivation to lie, because, the people who testified lost their jobs, faced, intense media scrutiny, lost friends and family, and they had to have known that those things were coming. I mean, if I made a very public statement that casted suspicion on the Democratic Party, I would be looking over my shoulder for quite a while, because we all know how their playbook operates. So I can't figure out why they would lie about this thing, but that still doesn't objectively show me that what they're claiming is true, or that they understood fully what was happening when the events took place. I'm not really making a judgment on that one way or the other. What is the most damning evidence to me, that's something, as John Mulaney would say, that something hinky is going on, is the very intense push to silence anyone making claims like this. The president of the United States was banned from Twitter because he was saying these things. So the story being presented as if they're trying to maintain the legitimacy of our elections, so they need to squash false information wherever they can, that's what we're being told. But if there was absolutely no truth to it, I feel like they would just let idiots make idiots of themselves, and go to court and prove their case, and they would be proven right. And wouldn't that be a better attack against Trump than silencing him? I feel like that's, really looks like you're guilty of something if you're silencing anyone who's talking about what you did, So the fact that they were trying so hard to keep people from even talking about it indicated to me that they, strongly indicated to me that they had something to hide. The Russian collusion scandal turned out to be completely fake, and nobody cared about spreading that misinformation. So it all just depends on what suits them at the time, But the reason both sides of this are rooted in the same faith is because both sides are coming from this wholehearted devotion to democracy. The Republicans are mad at the perceived injustice of rigging an election because it casts doubts on our democracy. Meanwhile, the Democrats are claiming that they want misinformation about the election being, a fraud to be silenced because they don't want to cast down on our democracy. And both of these parties are doing what they're doing because of their faith in democracy, and the actions are totally antithetical to one another. Now we can debate, whether either of these sides actually care about democracy, but that's the message being spread. That's what they're saying. They're saying that it's because of the integrity of our elections and the sacred democracy and all these words that that they're fighting in the ways that they are. And it also just goes to show you how unprincipled they really are, because what did the Democratic Party do for 4 years? They framed Trump for a Russian collusion scandal thing and tried to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the last election. And then as soon as Trump starts making these claims that it was rigged, they're like all of a sudden, mad at him and saying you can't do that. It's like, well, of course an election could be rigged if you just spent 4 years trying to convince us that 2016 was rigged, So I don't know. It's just silly to me that they can switch sides so easily, and I don't know. But here's the thing about democracy. It is a neutral tool. It's not an objectively good or bad thing. It has been used to achieve objectively good things, and most of the time, like 99% of the time, it's used to achieve objectively bad things. Every president, senator, and congressman was placed in the government by a democratic election. A lot of laws and taxes and things that we hate were placed there by democracy. Whichever side you happen to be on, whatever you hate about government was probably accomplished by democracy. Some taxes and laws and things are imposed on us without voting for them, but the people who put those laws there were put there democratically. So you can blame that ultimately on democracy too. Democracy is just majority rule or mob rule, if you will. I think we can all agree that the majority of people wanting something doesn't make it an objectively good thing. Dave Smith gives the analogy all the time of, I'm going to butcher it, but let's say 5 people, and they put it to a vote whether they should beat up one of those 5 people. So the vote comes out, 4 of those 5 guys are in favor of beating up the 5th guy, and the 5th guy obviously votes no, but too bad, the vote was 4-1, majority rules that you beat the guy up. So is that legitimate? Does that make it like a good thing because the majority wanted it? Like, no, it's kind of a neutral tool. It can be used well and it can be used horribly. But let's say that one guy wants to boss the other 4 around and take half of their money. Now they put to a vote whether he should do that, and it's 4-1. That guy doesn't get to be a tyrant. So was that a good use of democracy? Yes. In both these cases, it is not democracy making something good or legitimate or bad or illegitimate. Democracy in both cases was the tool used to achieve something. It was used for bad, and then it was used for good. And in either case, it was completely arbitrary, because those people did not have to put to a vote whether 4 people beat up one person or whether one person takes half of the money of the other 4. They didn't have to vote on that, But so, it was still, no matter how it was used, it was still completely arbitrary and just, a decision to put it to a vote. So we all agreed that that's how it would be done, and then respected the results. It doesn't mean it's a good system. It's just what we decided to do, So why worship this neutral tool as if it was objectively good or bad? And make no mistake, people are worshiping it. I've never heard the word sacred thrown around, next to the word democracy so many times as I did right after the election. For the news to be using the word sacred, just weird, right? It is a holy institution in the religion of statism, specifically, American statism. And it's not a very good institution either, Jeff Durbin, I can't remember if I said this on one of the last episodes where I talked about this kind of stuff, but Jeff Durbin was talking about the election on Apologia Radio, and I love Jeff Durbin, so don't confuse this, but he was talking about how Joe Biden is a communist. And he's not, but that's what Jeff Durbin was saying. But he was saying that Joe Biden is a communist, and that the election being rigged was so bad because we need to maintain the integrity of our democracy. Well, in your view, the democratic system could have gotten a communist elected, right? Like, what if it wasn't rigged and he still won? Would he then be an objectively good choice because the majority of people voted for him? Like, no. So democracy isn't really this good or bad thing. Like, if it's possible for a communist to become president, then it's not a very good system, is it? In fact, the argument could be made that democracy is an objectively bad thing just as easily as you can make the argument that the majority of people want objectively bad things. And in case you haven't figured it out yet, I definitely believe that. I do believe that the majority of people want objectively bad things. Not for any nefarious reasons, mind you, but just because they're uninformed. Like, who doesn't want people to have health care? That's a perfect example of an issue where people technically want the right things, but they've, been deceived as to how we get them. Health insurance and health care are two completely different things, but the state has made them synonymous. To have the care of a doctor, you must have insurance that will cover all of your costs. And if possible, that insurance will be paid for by someone else. So ask yourself this question. Why has health care been such a huge issue in the government for at least 10 years now, if not a little longer, yet the prices continue rising to unaffordable levels? Think about it. The prices continue to rise because regulations make things more expensive. Long story short, you will notice that the more government intervenes in the healthcare market, the more expensive it's going to be, even if they claim to want to give you free healthcare. Best case scenario when it comes to government healthcare would be that they do find a way to provide it free across the board to everybody. But the reality is that it still won't be free. The only way for it to be 100% free would be to force doctors to work for free. And that's not going to happen. And I'm not even sure you could argue that that's free anyway, because you're still taking something from the doctors. And it would be morally wrong if you did that, by the way, if you haven't, figured that out. It would technically be slavery, forcing someone to work for free. So they'll pay for it through your taxes or borrowing or inflation. And all of those things are technically taxes, by the way. Taxes mean you pay. Borrowing means you pay later. And inflation means that the amount of dollars in your bank account may not change, but their value will be diminished. So, you're paying by losing value in your dollars. So even if that doesn't feel like stealing, it still is. If I have $1 today and $1 a year from now, but a year from now it can only buy what 50 cents used to buy, then I technically have lost some money. Because if the money loses value, it's the same as losing a portion of that money. It's like they stole 50 cents from me over the course of a year, even though my dollar remained a dollar. So it's been called the hidden tax, a tax that you don't really see with actual dollar amounts. It's just the value of things start to drop. But if you put it to a vote, I'm relatively certain that most people would vote for some kind of free healthcare system. They have no idea what they're doing, but best case scenario, they're inflating the heck out of our money to pay for it. And that means they're stealing from you. And worst case scenario, they regulate things more and make healthcare way more expensive without actually being able to provide any of the services they promised, leaving us to pay twice as much for a checkup as we used to. So in that example, as it is in every example, the majority of people have been tricked into voting for something that's actually objectively bad. So case in point, we're talking about the election. Joe Biden and Donald Trump were both objectively bad candidates. But by limiting the people's options to two, they were forcing you to make a bad choice that they believed was a good choice, and they got you to believe it was a good choice. I guess I should say most people believed that they were making the right choice, even if their rationale was that they wanted, the other candidate to lose because he's worse. So many people voted for one guy because they just didn't want the other guy. Democracy is fine, I guess, when a group of friends are trying to decide, where to have dinner. but it's still arbitrary and says nothing to the objective value of where you end up having dinner. It's just a way to satisfy the most people in the car. One restaurant might be an objectively better choice. Imagine there was a restaurant with the cheapest food in town, and it was also the best possible kind of food, and they had all different types of food, and it was healthy. One person could get sushi, the other person could get a burrito, etc. And, one person could get waffles, whatever, and it was all really good food, and it was cheaper. Now, that would not be a bad restaurant if one person in the car forced the other 4 people in the car to go there. It would just be a contentious decision. It would be a decision that most people in the car weren't okay with until they got there and saw how great the restaurant was, If they democratically choose to go to a 2-star motel diner, it doesn't mean that's objectively the best option in town. It just means that the majority of people in the car wanted to go there. But 3 or more people in the car voted to go there because they like the outfits that the waitresses wear. So it was a pretty bad choice of restaurant for a pretty insignificant reason. And that one person in the car knows about the amazing restaurant with cheap, good, and plentiful food, and he knows that an objectively bad decision has been made. But he might still concede to the hotel diner because it makes the most people happy in the short term. But if he had just driven to the nice restaurant instead of putting it to a vote, then everyone would have enjoyed the food and probably would have chosen to go there, any time they got the chance to. So that's basically an analogy for freedom. See, democracy and state subsidies and just all the stuff I hate are analogous to the waitress outfits. It might be pleasing to the eye, but it actually gives you no nourishment. The food provided by those waitresses is undercooked. It doesn't come out of the kitchen for an hour and a half, probably has spit in it, and it costs 3 times as much as the other restaurant. But freedom is that other restaurant, the good restaurant, the one where they figured out how to give everybody everything they wanted for the cheapest price. But they never go to that restaurant because one person is afraid to take away the waitress outfits from the rest of his friends. He knows that they won't understand his decision in the short term. He knows that they'll be mad at him. So, he knows that he's going to, deprive them of something, or that they're going to feel deprived of something. So democracy might kind of work in a situation where 5 people are trying to decide where to go to dinner, but the stakes are so low. Get at the stakes, but it doesn't it doesn't work when it involves authoritarian leaders and policies that are going to negatively impact other people's lives. So that all happened after the last episode I did on the state religion. But you know what happened after that? The temple was ransacked. Did you know about this? Did you hear about this? Yes. Some followers of Donald Trump stormed a house of worship, breaking the windows, defiling the offices. People got really upset about it. And I'm obviously referring to what, has become known as the Capitol storming on January 6th. Anyone who's been following the story knows that we still don't have all the details that we need, so let me be as objective as I can. Trump had a rally in D.C. on January 6th and encouraged his followers to go to the Capitol and protest. He's being accused of inciting a riot. I read most of the transcript of that speech, in order to get to the bottom of it. And let me tell you, the only thing harder than listening to Trump is reading a transcript of his words. It's so unfocused. It's just aggravating. But he's being accused of inciting a riot. So I wanted to see if that was true. The only thing I found in the transcript, as far as an actual call to action goes, was that he said, "Let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue." He also said the words "fight like hell," which I believe is the language that got him into trouble. But in reality, what politician hasn't said something like that? What he actually said was, we fight like hell. So whatever fighting means in that statement, it referred to something already taking place, not something that was about to happen. So anyways, a bunch of people left that rally and went to protest at the Capitol. Things escalated, I guess you could say. I always think of Anchorman when I say escalate. So a bunch of people started forcing their way into the Capitol, and they broke a bunch of windows and doors. And after that, you know, pretty tame riot by any recent standard. I mean, the ones over the summer killed a lot of civilians and burned down a lot of businesses. And this one, I saw a picture of one guy walking off with the congressional pulpit, and, some people took selfies sitting at Nancy Pelosi's desk. Did I say Pelosi, like a Polish? She's a bad person, but I don't think she's a Polish person. Nancy Pelosi's desk. Whatever. Trump took to Twitter after, it seemed to evolve into a riot, and he specifically told his followers to act peacefully, but, so that's kind of the best I can do to sum up what actually happened. Pretty much everything else is questionable. So this is being spun as domestic terrorism, an attempted coup, an insurrection, an armed takeover. It's just not. Maybe something will come out that we don't know yet, but so much has come out that kind of seems to point in the direction of this not really being that big of a deal. Before we go any further, before I get personal, 5 people did die. I'm not going to ignore that. The only one of those 5, objectively, without a question, was murdered, was a Trump supporter who was killed by Capitol Police. And I don't use the term murder loosely there. I've seen a video. Well, I've seen a couple different videos. The first one I saw, brutal. I couldn't find it again, so I can't, link to this or anything. But basically, there are some doors with windows, and the protesters are on one side of the glass trying to break in, and there are police on both sides. The protesters are breaking down the doors, but you can see both sides of this through the whole video. And here's the thing. There are police on both sides of the doors. They're breaking down the doors for several minutes, it seems like. And then seemingly kind of out of nowhere, one of the officers on the inside of the glass fires through the window and kills a woman named Ashley Babbitt. So I saw a couple different videos, like I said. First one I saw, thought the officer shot her like 5 times. Again, I couldn't find that video again. I could only find it on like news sites that wouldn't show the actual shooting. She also didn't seem to be the most aggressive one at the door. It kind of seemed like she was just standing there while other people were breaking down the door. I don't know, but I couldn't find that video again, so I won't say that definitively. But, from any angle, they didn't need to shoot her at the time, and whether they shot her once or like 5 times, I don't know. The different videos I saw seemed to kind of indicate different things, but it was brutal. But, there are other cops around her. This officer definitely risked shooting another officer and possibly some other people, and for what? Because they were breaking down the doors? Like, I get that's scary, but there are literally cops standing next to them. Like, what changed the situation all of a sudden that you needed to start firing a weapon into a crowd of protesters and police? Like, if you're not going to be upset about the protesters, at least be upset that other cops were put in danger by this guy. They ended up evacuating, and the protesters kind of had their run of the Capitol anyways, so it was kind of all for nothing. Whatever the case, police on the same side of the glass did not consider themselves to be in enough danger to shoot her, but the police on the other side of the glass did. So that should be at least questionable. I'm sure we won't see any big trial for that guy, though. We're probably gonna get a Monday off in March every year to celebrate that guy for the rest of our lives. So that's one. Ashley Babbitt's one. She was objectively killed, but she was a Trump supporter. She was killed by police. Okay. Brian Sicknick was an officer who died. It was originally being reported that he was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, but some other people, including his own mother and I think his brother, were actually saying that he died of a stroke. So I can't make a definitive statement on that one, but I don't know. It's kind of looking like a stroke. So the thing you got to know about Sicknick was that he was actually a thief. It's true. Stole my name. I'm Sicknick. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I've been in and out of court for years suing Slick Rick, which is a derivative of Sick Nick. And then I finally get all that sorted out. And then here comes this guy that thinks he's Sick Nick. It makes me sick. That's what it really does. The other 3 people who died were... Everyone just ignore my mental illness and move on to the next thing. The other 3 people who died were all protesters. They were all Trump-supporting protesters or rioters, whatever you want to call them. Kevin Greason, heart attack. Roseanne Boyland, she was crushed by a crowd. And Benjamin Phillips, who also had a stroke. So maybe the protesters killed one cop, but it looks like he died of a stroke. Either way, this comes after the cops killed one of them for no visible reason, so I don't know. It would be weird to me if Sick Nick was the only person killed by the protesters, and for his death to be as brutal as they were claiming. Like, why just one person? And why so severe? Like, it just doesn't match with the rest of the information we're getting. Like, why would one person just kill, like, bludgeon someone with a fire extinguisher and then nothing else happens like that, you know? So we'll have to wait and see what eventually comes out of all that. I did try to find stats on how common heart attacks are during riots, but I couldn't find anything that didn't relate directly to this event, so I tried to provide you with that information. Maybe it's not super rare for like 5 people to die of heart attacks during a riot of that scale, you know, like for all I know, maybe it's pretty common and it's not even like, I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be held responsible, but, you know, maybe it's not that weird of a thing to happen. So another thing that's got to be addressed is the guy with zip ties. Much was made out of this guy. After he was arrested, they found zip ties on him. There is actually a picture of him holding the zip ties in the Congress, whatever the worship room is, where the Congress people sit and ruin all of our lives. You know, he was jumping over the pews or whatever you call it. So that looks like, you know, he showed up looking to take prisoners. And I can't say I wouldn't have loved to see some congressmen in zip ties, but hey, that would be a violent and technically wrong. You know, mostly it's just wrong to stoop to their level like that. The first thing I heard that made me question this whole, you know, zip tie thing was that there was a video of him stopping other protesters from disrespecting the building. Like, I saw the video when it first came out, but you know how that goes. You can't find that video anymore. I don't know where it went all of a sudden. But I remember him throwing someone out of a chair. Like, they were sitting in someone's chair, and he, like, threw them out of the chair and, like, was telling them to respect it. And like, he kept people from messing with some of the fixtures and stuff. So, I mean, he looked like he was trying to control the crowd that was protesting. So why would someone showing up to take prisoners be so concerned with respecting the Capitol? And I guess it has turned out now that the zip ties belong to Capitol Police and that they were carelessly left somewhere. And this man, Eric Munchell, took them so that no one would use them for any nefarious purposes. That's what he's claiming. Ultimately doesn't matter if that's true or not, because he didn't tie anyone up. So, I mean, it's the same thing. We'll talk about the weapons in a second, but it's like, if none of this ended up getting used for anything wrong, then I don't know, you're gonna have a tough time proving what the nature of those things actually was, you know. It's also been described as an armed takeover, but I really didn't see a lot of guns in the videos I saw. You know what? That's dishonest. I didn't see any guns in any of the videos I saw, but I'm afraid to make that hard of a statement because there may have been some. You know, as far as I know, all the guns that they found that were found on people who were already arrested, meaning they weren't out for everyone to see until the people were searched by police. So even when the police were murdering a fellow protester, the guns were not turned on them. That's saying something. So, I mean, clearly no guns were being taken out and used for this riot. They just happened to have them on them, probably. They probably carried a gun to the rally and then ended up at the Capitol later. So all that adds up to most of the media reporting was false or blown out of proportion or intentionally misleading in a lot of cases. You're going to hear the story and it's going to be reported as the Capitol riot where 5 people died. But it turns out 4 of them were protesters. 4 of them died accidentally. Roseanne Boyland was crushed by the crowd, but I'm assuming she wasn't crushed on purpose, obviously. I mean, how could you coordinate that with so many people to kill her for such a weird way and for such a weird reason, probably. So it basically all comes down to whether Sicknick died of a stroke or was actually beaten with a fire extinguisher. But with the way everything else is turning out, definitely leaning toward one of those theories over the other. So why go through all that? I just wanted to get it out of the way before I start actually talking about what I actually want to talk about, because I don't want the conversation to get twisted. I don't want people thinking that I support killing cops or violent takeovers or anything like that. I have no reason to believe that anyone was killed intentionally or that this was any kind of a coup or takeover. This was a protest that got out of hand, and the only people, definitively were murdered by the state. Ironically, this was actually a mostly peaceful protest. I did hear that phrase get thrown out a lot over the summer, and it wasn't true. But in this case, it actually kind of was true. Like, they broke some stuff, but it was a mostly peaceful protest, in my opinion. So why is it that this event, was portrayed in the media the way that it was, while the BLM riots over the summer were portrayed the way they were? And I don't mean to keep throwing these two things together. It's just I feel like I cannot talk about the Capitol without mentioning the BLM protests, because those were protests essentially backed by the state. I mean, you had congressmen and senators approving of these riots over the summer, and then this thing happens, and now it's compared to 9/11. It's the worst thing that's ever happened on American soil. So it's too ironic not to talk about these things together like this. So I'm not trying to compare them, really. I'm just saying it's ironic. I don't know. But why were the riots that killed 19 people that we know of, probably more, and destroyed a lot of personal property all across the country, with wide-scale looting and assaults taking place all over, like, why are those portrayed as mostly peaceful protests, while a protest that destroyed nothing except a government building and caused some people to die of stress-induced causes, ruled as an insurrection or a violent coup? Well, I'm going to tell you something right now that you've probably never heard before. You might want to take a seat. If any of you are driving, pull over. Chris Jameson, if you're listening to this at work, you might want to hang up the phone. Here it is, everybody. The state cares more about itself than it does about personal property or civilian lives. Now, I know that's going to take a moment. Probably never going to see the world quite the same way. Let's just have a moment of silence for the death of your innocence right now. All right, that was long enough. The reason these protests or riots or whatever you want to call them were so qualitatively different from one another is because in one of them, a temple was destroyed and the lives of the priesthood seemed to be threatened. And in the other one, it was just regular stupid old people. Just stupid, like, business owners who contribute to society. Now, I do not support violence of any kind. I do not support the destruction of property. But I'd be lying if I said I care whether or not some windows were broken at a government building. We're ultimately going to pay for it, so I know I should care, at least on that level, but I really super don't. I got some pushback on a few Facebook posts I did during the protest. The point of one post was that it wasn't as bad as the BLM riots. The point of the other one was that you shouldn't feel bad for politicians. And I stand by both of those sentiments, really. I actually had someone tell me that they disagreed with my statement that the BLM riots were worse. And that I did not expect. By what metric could you possibly make that claim? Here's the answer. Delusion. We need that meme from The Office with Jim and the whiteboard, and he just says delusion. Only by delusion are the results of the Capitol riot worse than the BLM riots. But if you care more about the priesthood than you do about personal property and civilian lives and the injuries that people sustained, then yeah, it makes sense. If congressmen are qualitatively better than civilians, then it makes sense. But still, none of them died. So it's not even like, making that comparison really counts. If congressmen died and civilians died, then okay, we can make a comparison maybe. But the congressmen weren't even affected. Like, they had to leave work for the day. Oh, bummer. For anyone thinking that I liked the riot at the Capitol, now's the time that I should clarify. There was something pretty exciting about a state building being attacked, but no, I don't like violence and I don't like destruction of property. Here's to anyone who thinks that I'm on the side of the Capitol rioters. Here's all you need to know about me. I don't hate the government because I love violence. I hate the government because I hate violence. There you go. So if you want to make an assessment about me and it doesn't fit into that statement, then you've made a misstep in your logic. However, after watching private businesses destroyed all summer long, seeing innocent civilians assaulted in the streets, and seeing the state do basically nothing about it, I have to say, a few broken windows at a government building doesn't bother me that much. I mean, all of the destruction was fixed. It's all over now. But there are a lot of businesses that were destroyed during the BLM riots that will probably never open their doors again because they couldn't afford to. Mind you, those riots came after months of the state forcing these businesses not to be open, forcing these businesses to be closed. I think my main problem with the Capitol riot was their cause. Obviously, anyone who participated in that is going to be labeled a terrorist and is probably going away for the rest of their lives. So that was super stupid on a personal level. But okay, if you think you're serving this greater good, then okay, maybe, but the cause was stupid too. The election was a very stupid reason to storm the Capitol. If they had been rioting over the lockdowns, that'd probably be a different story. Think about that. The government did what they did through the lockdowns all year long, and that wasn't enough to get you to riot. But then, Trump says that the election was stolen from him, and now you're ready to go and break some windows. Why? Stop listening to the people in charge of you. They are lying to you. They're all lying to you. I have to say, and if anyone from, the FBI or the NSA is listening, you should know that this show is satire, and I'm not at all talking about killing congressmen. You get it. Here's what I have to say. If the government did what they did all throughout 2020 and continue to do into this year and probably for years to come, forcing people not to work, forcing people to wear masks, shutting businesses down, not letting people see their families or celebrate holidays together. In some cases, they even did things that directly led to people's deaths. So if this group of people had gone down to the Capitol to protest those things and a few congressmen got killed, all right. I mean, basic cause and effect would tell you that they were risking their life, from the outset, treating people that way, but take that with a grain of salt because, you're literally listening to someone who lost a lot because of the lockdowns, job, school, church, extended family, basic human freedoms, wedding got canceled. The list goes on. I'm just saying, you're not talking to an unbiased person when it comes to the evils that the government committed. So, I'm not going to go kill congressmen and waste the rest of my life in jail. But, I would be sad if people got killed. But, man, it would be akin to me, seeing a member of the drug cartel killed by a rival gang. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, you were doing some pretty risky stuff. So, I mean, I'm sad that you're dead, but like, yeah, you kind of had it coming, like getting involved in the kind of things you were involved with, like you literally forced people into poverty and forced people away from their families. Like, well, you reap what you sow. The media was actually like comparing the Capitol storming to 9/11, which led to a lot of, other people making that comparison. And why? Why would the state want this comparison to be made? Because that's a temple and the priesthood was in danger, I mean, like, how many times did we hear the word sacred? Again, sacred in the reporting of that event. It's not sacred. It's a building built and maintained with blood and stolen money, and it's full of people who make their living from stealing from us. There is nothing sacred about it. Their lives are not qualitatively better than the people who perished in the BLM riots. In fact, the argument could be made that they are not worth as much as, to society or anyone else as the productive business owners who had their lives ruined by the BLM riots. I can make a strong argument that a business owner does more for you than a congressman ever will in their lifetime. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today, it's not a new thing, it's something that persists, the COVID stuff. Obviously, you obviously know where I stand with this by now, even if this is like your first time listening to the show. I mentioned at the top of the show the way certain religions kind of splinter off from the main one. So the COVID religion, or the superstition, has splintered off from the main religion of statism, but it does kind of occupy its own space now. Many people have talked about the moving of goalposts when it comes to the COVID restrictions, but a lot of people don't realize that this is actually a form of faith building. So the initial lockdown was supposed to be 2 weeks, and the rationale for that was so the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. Well, that turned out not to really be a problem anywhere outside of like New York, and even New York got it figured out pretty quickly. But by the time the 2 weeks was over, the goalpost was moved to waiting for cases to go down. So around the summertime, cases were way down, and then they said we had to wait for a vaccine. Now we have a vaccine, but they're saying we can't return to normal life even with a vaccine. We still have to wear masks, and maybe 2 masks, and social distance, and avoid large gatherings, and all that stuff. Scarcely does anyone even remember that the whole point of this at the beginning was not to eradicate the virus from the face of the earth, which you probably cannot do, but the point was so the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. So yes, we can attribute a lot of this, like goalpost shifting to government incompetence, and definitely to a large degree, a lust for power is probably at play, but what is actually happening is a faith-building exercise. John Hayward was talking about this in a Twitter thread a couple weeks ago, and he basically said that when a theory shatters, faith is the glue that holds it together. So the hospitals never got overwhelmed. Okay, so the theory was shattered. But what was the response? Not the rational response, which was to say viruses are going to virus and move on with our lives. The response was a placement of faith in a new theory. Almost a complete denial of the old theory, and now we have a new theory. We have to wait for the cases to go down. So it's a placement of faith in the state to protect us and these so-called experts to tell us what to do and how we're going to survive this. And once we have a new goal, a new word from on high, we have something to live for and to strive for and to put our faith in. So now our whole focus is cases going down. And you can't falsify earlier goals if you already have a new goal to focus on. So new theory, new goal, renewed faith. And then the same thing happened when the goal was moved to focus on vaccines. And we'll probably see it happen a few more times that way. The ultimate goal is probably going to be 0 cases worldwide, which may not even be a possibility. But if the experts tell us that's what the goal is, then by George, that's what we're going to do. You see this with any cult or religion that, predicts the end of the world. The day the world is supposed to end, comes and goes unceremoniously. And then the cult leader tells his followers why the end of the world didn't come. and they set their focus on the next day the world is supposed to end. And here's an interesting parallel. Usually the explanation is something along the lines of, well, the end of the world didn't come because you did X, Y, or Z, or they did X, Y, or Z. We didn't have enough faith. We didn't accomplish what we were supposed to accomplish, so on and so forth. What happened every time the end of the world never came for the COVID religion? A governor or a doctor, who may not even be a doctor in some cases, or some unqualified bureaucrat of some sort, they came out and berated people for not wearing their masks, or still having church, or still having parties, or still leaving the house. We can blame this on the Sturgis motorcycle rally, or a Trump rally, or the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter that the data isn't backing up any of their claims. We have a scapegoat. We have a call to action. We have a priesthood to tell us what to do. The governor of Nevada was doing this exact thing, and then he tested, positive for COVID a few days later. That's weird. You were just out here berating people for not following the guidelines, and then you got it. It's inexplicable. Much was made out of the Super Bowl in Florida. Very few people were wearing masks, and there were a lot of people there, and it was supposed to be catastrophic. Well, pull up the COVID chart for Florida, and you'll see that over a month later, cases are still declining. So they had the Super Bowl, and nothing happened. But no one is even thinking about that, because by the time they said, well, in 14 days, you're going to see this thing spike. And then by the time the dreaded, 14-day period came after the Super Bowl, we were on to the next catastrophe. And no one's even looking at Florida charts to see if the Super Bowl prediction came true, I noticed this a lot with the QAnon theories. They made some outlandish claims. And by the time these things were supposed to come to fruition, they had something else they were talking about or looking forward to. And no one was even thinking about the failed prediction anymore. But the thing that has disgusted me since the very beginning has been the sick fetishization of catastrophe. I've never once heard someone say, hey, I'm a little worried about people getting together with their families for Christmas. It could be bad, but let's hope everything's okay and nothing bad happens. I've never once heard, even a modicum of hope that things will be okay, or some freaking humility that they've been wrong about everything. It's always like, oh, Florida's going to be sucking in 2 weeks. Everyone's going to die in Florida. And it's the sick delight in the idea that the infidels of your faith will suffer for their sins. They want the infidel to burn, You see this kind of thing in a lot of religions, not all, but a lot of them. And, not all religions are like Christianity, where we hope that people don't have to suffer on Judgment Day. We hope people hear the gospel and repent and stand before their king on Judgment Day, washed by the blood of the Lamb. A lot of religions act like, okay, well, we'll see how that turns out for you. God's going to get you. You'll be sorry, and some Christians act that way too, but it's not correct. You're just as bad as those people. You don't deserve salvation any more than they do. You should hope that God has grace on them just like he did on you. But the COVID religion doesn't hope for good things for the people who disobey. They don't hope that they receive mercy. They want huge numbers of people dying so they can be right about their predictions. And they never are. That's the worst part. They are never right about these catastrophic events that are supposed to happen, and yet they keep making predictions. COVID has a lot of parallels to the war on terror. It's never going to end. You've made an impossible goal so that you never have to give up the game. You can't really define success or failure in the COVID thing, has anyone actually said what the goal is right now? We have the vaccine. 0 cases would probably be ideal, but is there an actual level at which you would let people return to normal life? If cases get this low, we can go back to normal. No, you don't really hear that stuff anymore, because then the game would end. There's no real exit strategy for this. You've set up an invisible opponent like terror or a germ, and have decided that you'll keep fighting until there's no more terror or no more germs. Well, that's not going to happen. Criticism isn't just ridiculed. like it should be, or dealt with. It's shut down. It's completely silenced. They claim to have the purest motives in their ideology, and the only reason their goals aren't met is because somebody sabotaged them. So we keep wearing the ceremonial garment, so the COVID spirits will have mercy on us. And I mean, I'm mocking them, but the real claims aren't much crazier than that. There is not a single peer-reviewed study to suggest that the masks are doing anything. In fact, look at the states with the strictest measures, and you'll see that they have the worst cases. Florida is doing a little bit better than California, with no state mandates in place. Yet California is one of the strictest states in the country. The average age in Florida is actually older than the average age in California. And, it's like a notorious place where people go to retire. And yet California's still worse off. How can that be explained? They aren't trying to explain it. And by the way, like, even if Florida was a little bit worse, that wasn't the prediction. The prediction wasn't that, Florida would be 5% worse or something. It was that you're all going to die. Like, this is going to be catastrophic. Bodies piled up in the streets. I mean, like, the things they were saying about Florida were just apocalyptic and ridiculous. And Florida's doing better. Florida's fine. So if that's any indication, then the masks are not working. Like, I'm sorry. I know people don't believe that. I know people, don't want to hear it, but like, we are a year into this, and I'm yet to see any evidence that the masks are doing anything. We were told, at first that with an 80% compliance rate with the masks, we could be out of this whole thing. I don't remember the time frame, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 weeks. Let's be safe and say 3 months. I'm feeling generous. 80% compliance with masks, and we're out of it in 3 months. Okay, well, we have a much higher than 80% compliance rate, north of 90%. I would venture to say upper 90s. Let's put it this way. I'm in Oklahoma. Where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. And if I'm not wearing a mask somewhere, I am the only one. So we have a much higher compliance rate than what they promised us that we needed, and it hasn't seemed to have any effect on the cases. And if it did, it was nowhere near as effective as they promised us. I'll link to this in the show notes as well. I know I've shared this with you before, but if you didn't go look at it, then shame on you. You need to. Tom Woods has these charts on his website, and they're just the normal charts that show the cases, the COVID cases in a given state or area. But he put on the chart when a mask mandate went into effect. And almost without exception, cases go through the roof, sometimes a month later. Like, it's almost like the masks are making it worse somehow. And, I've got theories about that, but it's not what we're really, talking about today. If you haven't seen the video of Rand Paul questioning Anthony Fauci, I highly recommend checking it out. It just came out a couple days ago, but I'll see if I can find it and put it in the show notes. But he's just trying to figure out why people who have either been vaccinated or have already had the virus are still expected to wear masks. And Fauci's response basically came down to, in case there's a new variant. In case? Because of something that might happen? You could justify anything because of what might happen. If that doesn't tell you that the masks are never going away, then you're just not being honest with yourself. They will make us wear them forever if it suits them. I know that sounds crazy, but look, dude, 2 weeks turned into a year. So, I mean, I was right about that. You should know not to doubt me at this point. So, we're wearing something on our faces that doesn't work in order to protect us from something that they ascribe personality traits to. Think about it. They talk COVID is a person, COVID hates Trump rallies but loves BLM protests. And I'm not making that up. I mean, I'm mocking them, but Anthony Fauci actually said that the protests were important enough for people to go out and not respect the guidelines. So people could go out and do that. It loves things the state loves, and it hates things the state hates. COVID might attack you if you walk into a restaurant without a mask, but if you just walk 10 feet over there to a table and sit down, you'll be fine. They ascribe preferences to this invisible force and actions. Also actions. Remember, the virus wrecked the economy. The virus forced you not to be able to see your family for Christmas. The virus forced you to watch your dad die on FaceTime. The government had nothing to do with that. It was the virus. It's basically a superstition that says if you wear the ceremonial garment, even though it's not proven to work, this invisible force won't hurt you. Like a fairy or a spirit or something. And it's a lie. You know who this invisible force chooses? Pretty much everybody. You know who wears the mask? Pretty much everybody. It's just nonsense. But that is the nature of false religions. They are founded on lies. The elite profit while the followers suffer, and you can't question them. So the best thing we can do as Christians is to not participate in this false religion whenever possible. Share the gospel with people and tell them that there's a better way. There's a better God than the state. There's a better and truer way to life than the life that the state offers you. Look at the life that the state is offering you right now. Work from home, wear a mask in the shower, stay away from your family. The state offers you a life of slavery, and that would have been mildly crazy sounding in 2019, but I think at this point, I think people are a little more receptive to hearing that now, like now that they see how bad it can really get. I think a lot of people were in slight denial about how bad state control could really get until they lived through 2020. And even still, there's a lot of you who are not willing to hear it and are not willing to believe me. But, God offers you eternal and free life. There's a better path of atonement for our sins than, the outrageous things that have been done in the name of social justice over the last year. We can look to Christ and have our sins forgiven. I can, you can, the Nazi can, the BLM rioter can, and the Trump supporter who stormed the Capitol can. We can stop tearing each other apart, stop being puppets of the state that seeks to control how we think and react to things, and we can find true freedom and justice and life in Christ. All right. It's going to do it for this week. That was a rough one. I'm my blood pressure is certainly elevated. I hope I didn't have that effect on you while you're listening to it. I hope you weren't sitting down for a nice relaxing listen. But got to do it every once in a while. I think I showed great restraint, not having a political episode since October. So yeah. That being said, head over to Patreon and sign up to be a member of the elect at patreon.com/deathofdeath. It's only $4 a month. That's less than the price of a good cup of coffee. Remember that every time you buy a cup of coffee. We're going through Christopher Hitchens' book, God Is Not Great, every month on the exclusive Patreon podcast. Just yesterday, I recorded an episode with Patreon supporter Brian Seitz about chapters 3 and 4 of that book, and it was really, really good. So if you want to hear that on Friday when it drops, head over to Patreon and sign up to be a member of the elect. That's all I've got in the way of business today. So I think that's it. All right. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.